During a business trip, I stopped at a grocery store and saw a homeless woman holding a baby, trying to buy formula. I froze. It was my daughter. When she saw me, she burst into tears. "Dad, they dumped me here with my baby." My blood boiled. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Jacob Calloway was 52 years old, and he had spent most of his life solving problems without making them worse. That was how he thought of himself. Not clever, not lucky, just steady. He was the man who read the contract twice before signing it. He was the man who checked the tire pressure before a long drive. He sold industrial equipment to farms and factories across the Midwest, and the job had taught him one lesson above all others. Small problems become big problems when people panic. So Jacob did not panic. He fixed things. That Thursday evening in late October, he was driving home through Iowa after 3 days on the road. 3 days of handshakes in cold warehouses. 3 days of hotel coffee that tasted like burnt paper. His back ached from the driver's seat. His shirt smelled like diesel and dust. The heater in his truck rattled every time he turned it above medium, and he had stopped noticing the sound years ago. The sky had already gone dark. The fields on either side of the highway were flat and gray, stripped down to stubble after the harvest. Somewhere ahead, 40 minutes north, his own empty house was waiting with the porch light on a timer. He was tired. He wanted coffee. That was the only reason he took the exit outside Cedar Falls. The grocery store sat at the corner of a half-empty lot. Its sign buzzed. One letter had burned out, so the word looked wrong from the road. Jacob parked near the door, killed the engine, and sat for a second with his hands on the wheel. He remembered thinking very clearly that he would be back on the highway in 6 minutes. Inside, the air was too warm. The floor tiles squeaked under his boots. Someone was mopping near the produce section, and the smell of lemon cleaner mixed with the sweet, tired smell of overripe bananas. A radio played a country song from 20 years ago through a speaker in the ceiling. The volume was low enough that Jacob only caught every third word. He got his coffee from the machine near the entrance. Black. No sugar. He held the cup and started toward the checkout. That was when he saw her. She was standing in the baby aisle, near the shelf with the formula and the diapers. A young woman. Small. She held a newborn against her chest with one arm, the way a person holds something they are afraid of dropping. Her coat was thin. Too thin for the weather. It was one of those cheap jackets that look warm in a store and stop working the moment the wind picks up. The cuffs were frayed. There was a dark stain near the pocket. Her shoes were worse. The canvas had gone gray. The sole on the left one had begun to separate at the toe. She was counting coins. That was the part that stopped Jacob's feet. She held them in her open palm and pushed them around with her thumb, one at a time, like she had already counted them twice and wanted a different answer. Then she looked up at the price tag on the formula. Then she looked back down at her hand. Jacob had seen a lot of people in a lot of grocery stores. He had never watched anyone do that. Something about her posture bothered him. The shoulders, the way her head tilted when she looked at the shelf. There was a memory in it that he could not place, and the not placing of it made his chest tighten before his mind caught up. He took a step closer. She shifted the baby higher and turned. His heart stopped. The coffee cup was suddenly very hot in his hand. He heard himself say her name, and his voice came out cracked and small, a stranger's voice. Lydia. His daughter stared at him. For several seconds she did not speak. Her mouth opened slightly. Her eyes moved across his face like she was checking each piece of it separately to make sure it was real. Her arm tightened around the baby. Then her eyes filled. Dad. The coffee cup hit the floor. Jacob did not remember letting go of it. Brown liquid spread across the tile in a wide arc and soaked into the frayed hem of her jeans, and neither of them looked at it. He crossed the aisle in 3 steps. What happened to you? Lydia's chin shook. She looked down at the newborn instead of at him. They dumped me here. The words did not make sense at first. Jacob heard them, and his brain simply refused them, the way a hand refuses a hot pan. Who? My husband. She swallowed. Her throat moved. And his mother. Jacob looked at the baby. The child was tiny, days old, maybe weeks. There was a knit hat pulled down over the small head, gray and pilled, clearly bought secondhand or handed down. The blanket was a bath towel. "Is that Maisie?" Lydia nodded once. "My daughter." His granddaughter. He had not known she had been born. He had not known if it was a boy or a girl. He had guessed, in the quiet moments in hotel rooms, and he had told himself the call would come when it came. Jacob looked around the store. The man with the mop had stopped moving. A woman at the end of the aisle was pretending very hard to read a label. He lowered his voice. "Where are you staying?" "Nowhere." His face hardened. He felt it happen. The muscles in his jaw locked, and something behind his eyes went cold and quiet. And part of him noted the change like a man noticing weather. "Where is Nolan?" "I don't know." "Where's Owen?" Lydia's face broke. It happened all at once. Her mouth twisted, and she pressed the back of her wrist against it, and the sound she made was not a sob. It was smaller than that. It was the sound of someone who had learned to cry quietly so a baby would not wake. "I don't know where my son is." The store noise kept going. The radio. The hum of the freezer case. The beep of a register somewhere behind him. Jacob stopped hearing all of it. He had built his life on the idea that steady men fix things. He had missed birthday dinners for that idea. He had driven through ice storms for that idea. And standing in aisle 9 of a grocery store outside Cedar Falls, holding nothing, with coffee soaking into his boot, he understood that the idea had failed his daughter completely while he was busy being proud of it. He reached out and took the diaper package off the shelf. Then the formula. The big can, not the small one. He took out his wallet. "Come with me." Lydia did not move. "Dad, I can't ask you to. You didn't ask." She stared at him. "Come with me," he said again. "Right now." She looked down at Maisie, then at the coins still in her palm. She closed her fingers around them, embarrassed, and pushed them into her coat pocket, and that small gesture put a crack straight through the center of Jacob Calloway's chest. He carried the basket. She carried the baby. At the register, the clerk scanned the formula and glanced at the two of them and said nothing at all. Jacob paid. Then he walked his daughter out into the cold parking lot, and the wind came across the empty asphalt, and he took off his own coat and put it over her shoulders before she could argue. "Get in the truck," he said. "We're going to talk." He did not take her straight to the motel. He drove first to a big box store on the edge of town that stayed open late, and he pushed a cart down the bright aisles while Lydia followed him with the baby, and he filled it without asking her a single question about price. Formula. Bottles. A brush to clean the bottles. Diapers in 2 sizes, because he did not know how fast babies grew, and he was not going to guess. Wipes. Baby clothes with feet in them. A pack of soft white blankets. Socks. A real coat, dark blue and heavy, with a hood. Lydia kept saying it was too much. She said it in the aisle with the bottles, and again near the registers, and the third time she said it her voice had gone thin, and she was not really arguing anymore. "Dad, please. This is too much." Jacob put a box of oatmeal in the cart. "You've eaten today?" She hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. He added crackers, peanut butter, apples, and 2 bottles of juice. The motel was 2 miles down the road. 1 story, 12 doors, a gravel lot, and a red sign with a missing bulb. Jacob paid cash for a week and did not comment when the woman behind the desk looked at Lydia's shoes. The room was small. There was 1 bed with a brown pattern cover, a chair by the window, a table with a lamp, and a heater under the window that came on with a metallic clank. The carpet had been vacuumed but not cleaned in years. The whole room smelled faintly of old cigarettes and the pine spray somebody had used to cover them. Jacob checked the lock on the door twice. Then he checked the window latch. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed and began to feed Maisie with one of the new bottles. And for a minute the only sounds in the room were the heater and the small, steady sucking of the baby. Jacob stood across from her with his arms folded. "Start from the beginning." Lydia took a breath that shook on the way in. "It's a long story. I've got all night." So she told him. She had married Nolan Mercer 4 years earlier, in a small ceremony in a church basement, because that was what they could afford. Jacob had been there. He remembered the folding chairs and the sheet cake, and how Nolan had shaken his hand hard, like a man proving something. At first, Nolan seemed kind. He worked as a mechanic at a shop off the county highway. He was good with his hands. He fixed the porch step at their rental without being asked. He replaced the water heater himself and saved them $600. He made Lydia laugh, and Jacob had watched them at that wedding and thought, with real relief, that his daughter had chosen someone who would show up. He was good, Lydia said. Her voice was flat now, the way people talk when they have gone over a thing too many times in their own head. For a while, he was really good. What changed? Owen. Jacob waited. After Owen was born, Brenda Mercer moved deeper into their marriage. 1 inch at a time. She started with visits. Then the visits became stays. Then she had a key. Brenda criticized everything. The way Lydia cooked. She said the chicken was dry and said it in front of Nolan, every time, with a small smile like it was a joke they all shared. The way Lydia dressed Owen. Too many layers. Not enough layers. That color makes him look sick. How much money Lydia spent. Brenda started asking to see the receipts. Then she started keeping them in a folder in her purse. And how often Lydia visited her father. That one had teeth. She'd say things like, "Must be nice to have somewhere else to go," Lydia said. Or she'd ask Nolan, right in front of me, why a grown married woman needed to run home to her daddy every other weekend. Jacob's hands closed slowly. And what did Nolan say? Nothing. At first. Lydia adjusted the bottle. Then he started agreeing with her. Eventually Brenda began telling Nolan that Lydia was turning him against his own family. She said it in the kitchen. She said it on the phone. She said it enough times that it stopped being an accusation and became a fact in that house. Then Lydia became pregnant again. Nolan wanted a boy. He said it like a joke at first. Another son. A brother for Owen. He said it so often that Lydia started dreading the ultrasound instead of looking forward to it. The technician turned the screen and said the word girl. And Lydia said her first thought was not joy. Her first thought was fear. Nolan barely spoke to her for 4 days. 4 days. Jacob said. He'd answer if I asked him a direct question. That's it. And his mother? Lydia's mouth went tight. She was worse. She was quiet for a moment. The heater clanked. Maisie's small hand had come loose from the towel and lay open against her mother's shirt. She said a granddaughter was useless to their family. Jacob stared at the floor, at the worn brown carpet, and at the wet mark near the door where their shoes had brought in the cold. He did not say anything for a while, because what came into his mouth first was not something a father should say in a room with a baby in it. When he trusted his voice again, he asked the only question that mattered. Then what happened? Lydia lowered her voice, as if the man were somehow in the room with them. Nolan started saying he didn't want me anymore. She told him the rest in pieces, and the pieces did not come in order. Shortly after Maisie was born, Nolan took Owen to Brenda's house. He said it was temporary. He said it the way people say things they have already decided. He told me Owen would stay with Grandma for a few days, Lydia said. Just until I was back on my feet. How many days? She did not have to think about it. 26. Jacob's head came up. 26 days? Lydia nodded. She was looking at the wall now, not at him. I kept asking to see him. What did Nolan say? He said I wasn't stable. Why? Her laugh had no humor anywhere in it. Because I was crying. After giving birth. I cried. And he wrote it down like it was evidence. Jacob's jaw tightened until it hurt. He knew what postpartum crying looked like. He had lived through it. 25 years ago, in a house on Ridgeway Street, he had come home from a shift and found Colleen sitting on the bathroom floor with a 2-week-old Lydia in her arms, crying so hard she could not explain why. He had sat down on that cold tile beside his wife and held both of them until the crying stopped. Colleen had apologized for an hour afterward. He had told her there was nothing to apologize for. Colleen had been gone 9 years now. Jacob thought about her more in that motel room than he had in months, and every thought ended the same way. She would have known. She would have called Lydia twice a week, and she would have heard it in her voice by the second call. He had called once a month, on Sundays, and asked if everything was fine and accepted the answer. Lydia kept going. 2 weeks after Maisie came home from the hospital, Nolan threw her out. It happened at 11 at night. He put 2 garbage bags of her clothes on the front step. Brenda stood in the doorway behind him with her arms crossed and told Lydia that if she tried to take Owen, she would call the police and tell them a woman having a breakdown was trying to remove a child from a safe home. I believed her, Lydia said. That's the part one can't. I actually believed her. I stood in the driveway with a newborn in my arms, and I was scared they were going to say I was the dangerous one. She spent the first nights in her car, then a motel that took $40 a night in cash, then a cheaper one. Then she ran out of money, and she had been standing in a grocery store trying to make $11 and change turn into a can of formula when her father walked around the corner. Jacob sat down in the chair by the window. He had to. His legs had stopped being interested in holding him. Why didn't you call me? Lydia turned her head. I did. His expression changed. What? I called you constantly. Her voice rose for the first time all night. Dad, I called you so many times I was embarrassed. I called from the hospital. I called from the car. I called from a gas station parking lot at 2 in the morning and left a message begging you to pick up. Jacob shook his head slowly. My phone never rang. I sent messages. I never got them. Lydia looked genuinely confused now, and something worse than confusion was moving in behind it. Jacob took out his phone. He held it so she could see the screen. He opened his call log and scrolled back through weeks of contractors and dispatchers in a dentist's office. Nothing from her. He opened his messages. Their thread stopped 2 months ago at a photo of Owen holding a plastic dinosaur and the words he named it after you. Nothing after that. Not one. Lydia went very still. Nolan used to have my phone password. Jacob looked up at her. The room seemed to get smaller. He set it up for me, she said. When we got the plan, he handled all of it. The account was in his name. Then he knew how to block you. Jacob said it quietly, and the quiet was worse than shouting would have been, because it explained everything. It explained the silence. It explained why a father who had never gone more than 3 weeks without hearing from his daughter had gone 2 months and told himself she was busy with a new baby. It also meant that for weeks, while Lydia sat in a cold car believing her own father had turned his back on her, a man had been deleting her calls and going to bed. Lydia started crying then, not quietly. The sound came out of her in a way it had clearly been waiting to for a long time, and Maisie startled and began to cry too, and for a moment the small room was full of both of them. I thought you didn't want to help me, Lydia said. I thought you were done with me. I thought. She pressed her hand over her eyes. I sat outside a gas station and I thought my dad hates me now, and I still couldn't figure out what I did. Jacob was out of the chair and across the room before she finished the sentence. He sat down on the edge of the bed beside his daughter, and he put one arm around her shoulders, and he felt how thin she had gotten through the coat he had bought her an hour ago. Listen to me. She shook her head. Lydia, look at me. She looked. I would never abandon you, Jacob said. Not for a month. Not for a day. Not for any reason a man like that could invent. Do you understand me? She nodded, and then she broke completely, and he held on to her while she did. He let her cry. He did not tell her it would be fine, because he did not yet know that it would be. He did not tell her to calm down. He just held on, the way he should have been holding on for 2 months, and he stared over her shoulder at the cheap curtain and the parking lot light beyond it. Later, after she had fallen asleep on top of the covers with Maisie tucked against her side, Jacob sat in the chair by the window and did not sleep at all. He thought about the coins in her palm. He thought about 26 days. He thought about a 5-year-old boy in a house on the other side of the county who had probably been told, in a gentle voice, by a woman who smiled while she said it, that his mother did not want him anymore. Around 3 in the morning, Jacob took out a hotel notepad and a pen, and he began to write. Not feelings, dates, names, times, everything Lydia had told him, in order, in his small square handwriting. He wrote until the pad was full, and when the sky started to turn gray behind the curtain, he had 2 clear thoughts. The first was that he was going to get his grandson back. The second was that he had never in his life wanted to hurt someone the way he wanted to hurt Nolan Mercer, and that if he was not extremely careful, that one was going to cost him everything. The next morning, Jacob drove to Nolan's house. He got there at 8:40. He had already been awake for 30 hours. He had already stopped at a diner, eaten eggs he did not taste, and used their bathroom to wash his face and put on a clean shirt from his overnight bag. That last part mattered. He had thought about it while shaving in a truck stop mirror. A man in a wrinkled shirt with 2 days of stubble looks like trouble. A man in a clean shirt looks like a problem you have to answer. The house sat on Miller Road, a small ranch with vinyl siding and a chain-link fence around the backyard. There was a swing set in that yard. One of the swings had a bench seat. Jacob looked at it for a long moment before he opened the truck door. The morning was cold enough that his breath showed. A dog barked twice from somewhere down the street and then gave up. He walked up the driveway past a truck with a shop sticker on the back window and knocked on the door 3 times, evenly. He did not threaten anyone. He did not scream. He wanted Owen. That was all. The door opened. Nolan Mercer stood there in a t-shirt and work pants, holding a coffee mug, and when he saw who it was, his face did something Jacob would remember for a long time. It did not go pale. It did not go guilty. It went tired, like a man finding a package on his step that he had not ordered. "You shouldn't be here. Where is my grandson?" Nolan took a drink from the mug before he answered. That was deliberate. Jacob understood the message perfectly. "Mom has him. Bring him out." "He's not here, Jacob." "Then call her." Nolan leaned against the door frame and let out a breath through his nose. "You've been talking to Lydia." "I found her in a grocery store counting change for formula," Jacob said, holding a baby in a bath towel. "In October." Something moved in Nolan's face. Just a flicker. Then it smoothed over. Nobody's stopping Lydia from seeing him. Jacob stared at him. "She hasn't seen him in 26 days. Nolan folded his arms across his chest. "She needs help. Your wife just gave birth. She isn't a good mother." He said it easily. That was the thing that struck Jacob hardest. Not the cruelty of it. The ease. Nolan Mercer said the worst sentence a man can say about the mother of his children the way another man would mention rain in the forecast. Jacob felt his own pulse in his ears. He kept his hands at his sides. He kept his feet where they were. "Say that again." "I don't need to say it twice. You said she isn't a good mother." Jacob's voice had dropped. It had gone quiet and flat, and he could hear how unfamiliar it sounded coming out of his own mouth. "So explain it. What did she do?" "She cried all the time. She just had a baby. She couldn't handle it. You didn't help her handle it." "That's not my job." Jacob almost laughed. It came up out of his chest, and he swallowed it because it would have come out wrong. Behind Nolan, down the hallway, Jacob could see into the kitchen. There was a booster seat on one of the chairs. A blue cup with a lid on the counter. Small things that belonged to a small boy who was not there. "Where is Owen?" Jacob asked, and Nolan smiled. It was not a big smile. It was the smile of a man who has finally reached the part of the conversation he has been waiting for. "He's safer with us." Us. That word did something to Jacob that no punch could have done at that moment. It drew a line straight down the middle of his family and put a 5-year-old boy on the far side of it. He stood on that concrete step in the cold and felt the whole shape of it arrive at once. This was not a man who had lost his temper and made a mistake. This was a plan. The phone. The 26 days. The garbage bags on the step at 11 at night. A story about an unstable mother, built slowly, told to enough people that it had started to sound true. And Jacob understood something else, too. If he put his hands on Nolan Mercer right now, on this step in front of this house, the story would be finished for him. It would stop being a story about a woman thrown out with a newborn and become a story about her violent father. Lydia would lose. Owen would stay. That knowledge was the only thing holding him in place, and it held by about a thread. "You should go," Nolan said. Jacob looked at him for 3 full seconds. "I'm going to remember that you smiled," he said. Then he turned and walked back down the driveway. He got into the truck. He put both hands on the wheel and squeezed until the leather creaked. He sat there in front of that house for maybe 40 seconds, breathing through his teeth, while the front door closed behind him. Then he drove to a coffee shop 2 miles away, and he called a lawyer. The attorney's name was Dana Whitlock. Her office was on the 2nd floor above an insurance agency, up a narrow staircase that smelled like carpet glue. She had gray at her temples, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and a habit of writing 3 words on a legal pad and then underlining one of them. Jacob sat in a chair on one side of her desk. Lydia sat in the other, with Maisie asleep in a second-hand car seat on the floor between them. "Tell me everything," Dana said. "In order. Don't clean it up." It took 90 minutes. Dana listened without interrupting. She stopped Lydia twice, both times to ask for a date. "You're sure it was the 14th?" "I'm sure." It was the day after his mother's birthday. Dana wrote that down and underlined the number. When it was finished, she set the pen down and looked at Lydia over the top of her glasses. I want to be honest with you about where you are. It's not where you think you are. Lydia's hands twisted in her lap. He's going to say I abandoned them. Yes, he will. And people are going to believe him. Some will. Dana leaned forward. But here's what he has and what you have. He has a story. You have a timeline. Stories are loud, and they win the first week. Timelines are quiet, and they win the case. Jacob spoke for the first time in a while. What do? We file today. They filed for divorce. With it, Dana filed a request for emergency temporary custody of Owen, and a petition for protection covering Lydia and both children. I want you to understand something, Dana told Lydia as she stacked the pages. The moment this is served, everything changes. Right now he thinks you're gone. After today he'll know you're not, and men like this do not respond well to that. What will he do? Fight. Hard. And fast. She was right. Nolan's response came back within 4 days, and it was aggressive in a way that told Jacob money was being spent somewhere. His attorney claimed Lydia had voluntarily abandoned the family home, that she had left of her own free will, taking the infant with her, and had made no serious attempt to contact her son, that the father had stepped up and arranged safe care for the child with a family member during a difficult period, that the mother's mental health following childbirth had raised legitimate concerns for the child's welfare. Brenda Mercer filed a statement saying the same thing in her own words. She wrote that she had been caring for her grandson out of love, at her son's request, and that she had personally observed the mother behaving erratically. She used the word unstable 4 times. Jacob read the pages twice at Dana's desk, while a copier ran somewhere behind the wall. They're good, he said finally. Dana tipped her head. They're rehearsed. That's not the same thing. She tapped one paragraph with her pen. Look here. She says she cared for Owen at her son's request, beginning in early October. She dated it herself. That's a gift. Why? Because a date can be checked. A feeling can't. The hearing was set for 11 days out. Jacob drove Lydia to the courthouse the first time for a scheduling appearance that lasted 9 minutes. Afterward, they sat on a wooden bench in the hallway outside courtroom 3 while people moved past with folders and paper cups. The hallway was too bright. The floor had that hard shine that old public buildings get. Somewhere down the corridor, a door kept opening and closing on a squeaking hinge. Lydia sat very straight with her hands flat on her knees. Her hair was pulled back. She had borrowed a blouse from a church donation closet and had ironed it that morning in the motel room using a towel and the flat side of a hairdryer, because Jacob had refused to let her stress about buying clothes, and she had refused to let him buy them. She looked exhausted, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. You don't have to be afraid, Jacob told her. She kept looking straight ahead. I am. Good. That got her. She turned her head. Good. Fear means you understand how serious this is. He watched a man in a gray suit push through the double doors at the end of the hall. People who aren't afraid make careless mistakes. They miss deadlines. They say too much. They get comfortable. He paused. But you're not alone anymore. That's the difference between this month and last month. Whatever they throw, it lands on both of us now. Lydia was quiet for a moment. He's going to say I'm crazy in front of a judge. Let him. Dad, let him. Jacob turned to face her. Because every time he says it, he has to prove it. And every time he can't, the judge remembers. She nodded slowly. Then she looked down at her hands. I keep thinking about Owen's face when they took him, she said. He waved at me. From the back seat. He thought he was going on a trip. Jacob did not answer that because there was no answer to it. He just sat with her in the bright hallway until it was time to leave. It happened on a Tuesday 4 days later, and afterward Jacob could account for every second of it. He had come to the courthouse alone to drop off a signed document at the clerk's window, because Dana's office was short-staffed that week and Jacob had time and a truck. That was the whole reason he was there. A piece of paper. He came out through the side doors into the parking lot a little after 2. The wind had picked up. The flag on the pole by the steps was snapping. There were maybe 15 cars in the lot, and a handful of people crossing between them. Nolan Mercer was standing near a silver pickup, finishing a conversation with a man in a suit. The suit shook his hand, said something, and walked off toward the building. Nolan turned and saw Jacob. He should have kept walking. Jacob knew it then, and knew it more clearly every day afterward. He should have walked to his truck, gotten in, and driven away. He walked toward his truck. Nolan spoke first. "You know what's funny?" Jacob said nothing. He kept his eyes forward and his stride even, and he was going to make it. He was 6 steps from the driver's door. "Nobody believes her anymore," Nolan said. "Not her lawyer. Not the caseworker. Nobody." Jacob stopped. That was the mistake. Not the punch. The stopping. He turned around. Nolan had his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders relaxed, and he was watching Jacob's face with real interest, the way a man watches a fire he lit. "She's telling everybody I stole her kid." He shook his head slowly. "She had a nervous breakdown and walked out. That's it. That's the whole story. You put her clothes in garbage bags. She packed those. You blocked her calls to me. I don't know anything about that." Jacob took 1 step closer. His hands were still open at his sides. "Where is Owen right now?" "Safe. That's not an address." Nolan smiled again. The same small smile from the front step. "You want to know the funny part? He doesn't even ask for her anymore." Everything went very quiet. That was the truest way Jacob could ever describe it afterward. The wind stopped mattering. The flag stopped snapping. There was a sound in his head like a door closing at the end of a long hallway, and then there was nothing between the sentence and his hands. The first punch came before he had time to think. It caught Nolan on the side of the jaw. His head snapped sideways. The coffee-colored gravel crunched under his boots as he stumbled back into the side of the pickup. Then another. Jacob felt his knuckles split. He did not feel pain. He felt heat, and behind the heat, something that had been waiting under his ribs since a grocery store aisle in Cedar Falls. Nolan came off the truck swinging and caught Jacob above the eye, and Jacob barely registered it. He hit him again. Nolan went down on one knee beside the tire. Somebody shouted. A woman's voice, high and sharp. Hey, stop." 2 men were running across the lot. Someone was on a phone already, saying the word police. Into it. Jacob stopped. He stood there over a man on the ground, breathing hard, with his fists still closed. Then he looked down at his own hands. The knuckles on his right hand were open and bleeding across 2 fingers. There was blood on his shirt cuff. His wedding ring, which he had never taken off in 9 years, had a smear of red on it. For the first time, he understood that he had become the exact thing he had promised himself he would not become. He had stood on Nolan's front step 4 days earlier and held himself back with a thread, and he had told himself that thread was strength. It had just been timing. The police arrived in under 6 minutes. Jacob did not run. He did not argue. He put his hands where they told him, and he answered their questions in short, flat sentences. And when a young officer asked him if he had struck the man first, Jacob said yes. His lawyer would later tell him that was the most expensive word he ever said. They put him in the back of a car. Through the window, he watched a paramedic shine a light in Nolan's eye while Nolan held a bandage to his mouth and talked and talked and talked. Lydia cried when she heard. She came to the county building that evening with Maisie in the car seat, and her eyes already swollen. And when they let her see him, she stood behind the glass and could barely get the words out. "Dad, why?" Jacob looked at her through it. He had spent the last 5 hours building sentences that would make it sound better. He had a good one about what Nolan said. He had another about how any man would have done it. He threw all of them away. "I lost control. Dad, that's the whole reason. There isn't a better one." His voice did not shake. "I heard him say something about Owen and I hit him, and I'm not going to dress it up for you. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong while I was doing it." Lydia pressed her hand flat against the glass. "He's going to use this." "Yes, he will. They'll say our whole family is." "Let them say it." Jacob leaned closer. "Listen to me. This is about me. It is not about you, and it is not about Owen. Dana will make sure everyone understands that difference, and you are going to keep walking into that courthouse with your head up every single time. How am I supposed to do this without you?" You're not without me. He held up his bandaged hand. I'm just useless for a couple of weeks. She almost laughed. It came out broken. Lydia. He waited until she looked at him. Do not soften. Not 1 inch. Not for his mother, not. For a caseworker. Not for anybody who tells you that being reasonable means giving something up. He is counting on you getting tired. Don't. He accepted responsibility for what he did. He never once said Nolan deserved it, though he thought it every night in the dark. And the case against Nolan continued without him. Here was the thing Nolan Mercer never understood. He thought Jacob was the engine. Take out the father, and the daughter stops. But Jacob had never been the engine. He had been the ride to the courthouse. The engine was a legal process that had already been started. And once that machine begins turning, it does not care who is in the parking lot. Jacob was released the next day on his own recognizance with a court date and a swollen hand. Dana referred him to a criminal defense attorney named Ruben Ortiz, who told him 3 things in their first meeting. 1. Do not contact Nolan Mercer for any reason. 2. Do not attend Lydia's custody hearing. 3. Start counseling before a judge orders it, because voluntary looks different than ordered. Jacob did all 3. He also did something else. He kept working the timeline. He could not go near Nolan. He could not sit in that courtroom. But he could sit at a motel table with a legal pad, and he could make phone calls, and he could drive to places where records lived. And in the weeks that followed, the timeline started filling in. It began with the hospital. Dana requested Lydia's delivery and postpartum records. Buried in the discharge notes was an entry written by a night nurse named Priya Raman. Nurse Raman had documented, in the clipped language of a woman who had seen too much on too many night shifts, that the patient had become distressed when discussing going home, had asked twice whether her husband had arrived, and had expressed fear about returning to the residence. The note included the words "declined to elaborate," and the box for follow-up had been checked. It was 4 sentences long. It was dated. It was written by a professional with no stake in anything. That's not a feeling, Dana said, holding it up. That's a record. Then came the neighbor. Her name was Dolores Whitcomb. She was 68, lived directly across Miller Road, and had been putting out her recycling at 11 at night in early October when she saw a young woman standing in the driveway across the street holding a baby with 2 black garbage bags at her feet. She remembered it because she had thought about calling someone and had not, and it had bothered her ever since. She remembered the older woman in the doorway with her arms crossed. She remembered that the porch light was on. She remembered that the young woman stood out there for a long time before she finally got into her car, and that she sat in that car in the driveway for another 10 or 15 minutes before she drove away. When Dana asked if she would put that in a sworn statement, Dolores Whitcomb said, "I've been waiting for somebody to ask me." Then came the school. Owen was 5 and had been attending a preschool program 3 mornings a week. His teacher, a woman named Petrie, had made notes in his file. Teachers do that. It is routine, and it is dated, and it is written at the time. 2 of those notes described statements Owen had made that fall. One described him saying that his mommy was sad and had to go away. Another, written on a different day, described the boy telling a classmate that he was not allowed to talk about his mom. Then came the phone records. Dana subpoenaed them from the carrier. The account was in Nolan's name, which turned out to be the single worst decision he ever made. The record showed 41 outgoing call attempts from Lydia's number to Jacob's number across a 19-day window. 41. They also showed something else. They showed the account's blocking and filtering settings had been modified from the account holder's device on a date that fell 2 days after Maisie was born. Jacob read that page in Dana's office with his bandaged hand flat on the desk and did not say anything for a full minute. 41 times, his daughter had called him. 41 times, a phone in his pocket had stayed silent, and he had gone on selling equipment and eating hotel breakfast and telling himself she was busy with the baby. "Are you all right?" Dana asked. "No," Jacob said. "Keep going." And then came the messages. Nolan and Brenda had texted each other constantly. Neither of them had ever imagined anyone would read it. The exchanges went on for pages. Brenda coaching, Nolan agreeing, Brenda telling him what to say to the lawyer, what to say to the caseworker, what to say to Owen. There was a message where she instructed him not to answer Lydia's calls at all because a record of arguing looks bad. And then there was one message sent at 9:14 on a Tuesday night, that Dana printed out and put on top of the stack. Nolan to Brenda. Once she realizes she can't get Owen back, she'll stop fighting. Lydia read it standing up in Dana's office with her coat still on. She read it once. Then she read it again. Her face did not change at all, which frightened Jacob more than crying would have. Then she set the page down on the desk, very carefully, the way you set down something hot. "I thought I was crazy," she said. Jacob shook his head. "No, for a year." Her voice was steady and strange. "For a whole year I thought there was something wrong with me. He'd tell me I was imagining things, and I'd write it down later, and then I'd read what I wrote and think, maybe I am doing this to myself." She looked up. "You believe me?" "I always believed you," Jacob said. "You didn't know. That's different from not believing." He stood, slowly, and came around the desk. "I didn't know because a man made sure I didn't know. He didn't do that because you weren't worth believing. He did it because he knew exactly what I'd do if I found out." Lydia's hand went to her mouth. "That's the part that gets me, Dad." Her eyes had finally gone bright. "He knew you'd come. He knew. And he took the phone away, and I sat there for 2 months thinking my father had stopped loving me." Jacob put his hand on the back of her head the way he had when she was 7. "He's going to find out he was right about one thing," he said. "I did come." Behind them, Dana Whitlock quietly slid the printed message into a labeled folder and wrote a number on the tab. The custody evaluation took place in a small office at a family services center on the north side of town, in a room with a low table, a bin of blocks, and a window with the blinds half open. Jacob was not allowed inside. He was not allowed in the building. He sat in his truck in the lot for 90 minutes with the engine off and the windows fogging, holding a paper cup of gas station coffee that went cold in his hands. He had gotten very good at waiting outside of things. The evaluator was a woman named Ruth Vandermeer. She had done this work for 19 years. Her report, which Jacob read 3 days later at Dana's desk, ran to 14 pages, and the section that mattered was on page 9. She had asked Owen simple, open questions. She had not led him. She had not asked him whether anyone had told him anything, because a 5-year-old will agree with almost any question shaped like that. She had asked him about his week, about his room at Grandma's, about what he liked to eat. She let him talk, and Owen talked. He told her that Grandma said his mother did not want him anymore. He said it plainly, the way children report the weather. He told her that Daddy said not to ask about Mommy because it made Daddy sad. He told her that he had a picture of his mom in his backpack and that he looked at it at school and not at home. Then he said something nobody had prepared for. "Mommy cried when Daddy took me." Ruth Vandermeer had written the exchange word for word. She asked, "Did you see that?" Owen nodded. She asked what else he remembered. "She told me she loved me. She said it at the car." That was the moment Nolan Mercer's story stopped working, because the entire structure of his case rested on one claim: that Lydia had left, that she had walked away from a 5-year-old boy during a breakdown, and that a father and grandmother had stepped in to hold things together. A woman who walks away does not stand at the car window telling her son she loves him. Jacob read that page in Dana's office and had to put it down and look out the window for a moment. His grandson had been carrying that memory around in his head for 2 months, in a house where he was not allowed to say his mother's name out loud. And he had kept it anyway. 5 years old, and he had held on to the last true thing he had. "Is this enough?" Jacob asked. Dana capped her pen. "On its own? No. Kids get coached, and their attorney will say ours was." She slid the report back into the folder. "But it doesn't stand on its own. It stands on top of a nurse's note, a neighbor's statement, 2 teacher entries, and 41 phone calls." She looked up. "That's not a story anymore, Jacob. That's a pattern." Brenda Mercer had been careful for a long time. She was careful in her written statement. She was careful in the hallway. She wore a soft cardigan to the courthouse and carried a large purse and thanked the security guard by name. She was careful right up until the day the evaluator's report was disclosed to both sides. Jacob drove Lydia to the courthouse that afternoon for a short status appearance. He parked, walked her to the doors, and stopped there because that was the arrangement. He waited outside on the wide concrete steps in a cold wind with his coat collar up. He was still there 50 minutes later when Lydia came out. Brenda came out 10 seconds behind her. "You've ruined my son's life." Lydia stopped on the top step. She turned around slowly. Jacob was about 30 feet away, at the bottom of the steps. He started to move and then made himself stop because there was a woman in a court uniform standing near the door and two people smoking by the rail, and every single one of them was watching. Lydia's voice carried down to him, clear and level. "You took my son. We took care of him." Brenda's face had gone red at the jaw. Her purse was clutched under one arm. "Somebody had to. You were falling apart in that house, and everybody knew it. You wouldn't let me see him, because you weren't fit to see him. 26 days, Brenda. We raised him when you couldn't." Brenda's voice had climbed now, past careful, past soft cardigan, into something raw. "We fed him. We put him to bed. We did what you should have been doing, and now you want to walk back in and take him like none of it happened." Lydia did not raise her voice. She did not step back either. "He is my son. You didn't deserve him." The words came out loud enough that the man smoking by the rail turned his head. And then the whole step went quiet. Brenda heard it. Jacob watched her hear it. He watched the exact second her own sentence caught up to her, and her mouth closed, and her eyes moved sideways to the court employee standing 8 feet away with a stack of files against her chest. "Because you didn't deserve him" is not the language of a grandmother protecting a child. It is the language of a woman making a decision about who gets to have him. For 9 weeks, Brenda Mercer's entire position had been that she was a bystander, a helper, a grandmother who stepped in during a crisis and would gladly step out again when it passed. That version of her had no opinion about whether Lydia deserved anything, because that version of her had never been in charge. She had just told a courthouse step full of witnesses otherwise. Lydia said nothing else. She walked down the steps, past her, and did not look back. Jacob met her at the bottom. He did not say a word until they were in the truck with the doors shut. Then he said, "Did you hear that woman by the door?" She wrote something down. Lydia's hands were shaking in her lap. Now that it was over, all of it was arriving. "I didn't say anything wrong, did I?" "Dad, I didn't." "You said 11 words." Jacob started the engine. "She said about 90. Yours were all true, and none of them helped her." Lydia let out a breath. "I wanted to scream at her. I know. I wanted to tell her exactly what I think of her. I know." He pulled out of the lot. "That's why you didn't." He glanced over at her at the light. "That's the whole trick, Lydia. They keep waiting for you to become the woman they've been describing. Every single day you don't, they lose a little more ground." The thing that finally broke it open had been sitting in a filing cabinet for 8 months. Dana called Jacob at 7 in the morning on a Thursday. He was already awake, sitting at the small table in the apartment he had rented so Lydia and the kids could have the house. "Are you sitting down?" "I am now. There was a prior report." Jacob set down his coffee. "Say that again." The preschool had contacted child welfare authorities the previous spring. Not because of anything Lydia had done, because of what Owen kept saying. He had said it more than once, to more than one adult. He had said that his daddy hurt his mommy. A 4-year-old had told his teacher, in the middle of an ordinary weekday morning, using ordinary words, and the teacher had done exactly what the law required her to do. A report had been made. It was logged. It had a case number and a date. An investigator had been assigned. A visit was made to the home, and then it had died. "How?" Jacob asked. "The way most of them die," Dana said. Somebody explained it. Brenda had been at the house that day. She had convinced Nolan of the line before the investigator ever came up the walk. Lydia was emotional. She had always been emotional. Sometimes she cried, and the boy got confused about why. There was no violence in this home, and here was a grandmother present in the house on a Tuesday afternoon, calm and helpful, offering coffee. Lydia herself, terrified and outnumbered in her own kitchen with her husband and her mother-in-law sitting on either side of her, had said that everything was fine. The investigator had noted no immediate safety concern. The file was closed as unsubstantiated. Nobody followed up. "That's it," Jacob said. "That's all it took? That's all it ever takes. One calm adult in a clean living room." But the file still existed. And now, with a custody evaluation and a protective order petition and a criminal referral all moving at once, somebody pulled it. Jacob drove to Dana's office that morning and read it himself. The old report contained dates. That was the whole miracle of it. Not conclusions. Not opinions. dates, and every one of them matched. The date of the preschool's call lined up with a week Lydia had described to him in that motel room, before anyone had shown her any file, when she had told him about a night that ended with her sleeping in Owen's room with the door locked. The date of the home visit matched the entry in her own handwriting in a notebook she had kept in the glove box of her car, because she had not trusted anything on her phone. The pattern went back 9 months before the divorce was ever filed, long before there was a custody fight to lie about, long before Lydia had any reason to invent anything, because at that point she was still trying to save the marriage. For the first time, there was independent documentation that the problem existed before the fight started. Nolan's story had one supporting beam holding it up, that Lydia had come apart after Maisie was born, and everything else followed from that. Now there was a government file from 8 months earlier that said the trouble in that house started long before the birth of a baby that his mother had called useless. His story was collapsing. Brenda's was collapsing with it, because hers had been built on his. And Lydia finally had the one thing she had never had in 4 years of being told she was imagining it. Proof. Jacob brought the file to the house that evening. Lydia was on the floor of the living room with Maisie on a blanket, and there was a pot of something on the stove, and the whole place smelled like onions and warmth. He set the folder on the coffee table and did not open it. They wrote it down, he said. Back in March. Somebody wrote it down, and it just sat there. Lydia looked at the folder for a long time. So, somebody knew. Somebody knew. She picked up her daughter and held her against her shoulder. I keep waiting to feel better when these things come out, she said. I don't. I just feel further behind. Jacob sat down on the edge of the chair. You're not behind. You were alone. He nodded at the folder. There's a difference, and it took me 2 months to learn it. The final custody hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in December. Jacob was allowed to attend. Ruben Ortiz had cleared it with the court on strict conditions. Back row. No contact of any kind with Nolan Mercer, direct or indirect. No expression, no comment, no reaction. Enter after him. Leave before him. If he looks at you, Ortiz said, you look at the wall. Jacob agreed to every word of it. He wore a gray suit that was 11 years old and still fit. He sat in the last row on the left with his hands folded and his back straight, and he did not turn his head when Nolan and Brenda came in and sat down at the far table. The courtroom was smaller than he expected. Fluorescent light, wood panels going brown with age, a radiator ticking against the side wall. A clerk typed. A bailiff stood by the door with his thumbs in his belt and watched the room without seeming to. The hearing lasted a little over 4 hours. Nolan's attorney went first, and he was skilled. He built the picture carefully. A young mother overwhelmed. A father doing his best. A grandmother stepping in. He used the phrase difficult postpartum period so many times that it started to sound like a diagnosis. He mentioned the assault in the parking lot 4 separate times, and every time he said it, he turned slightly toward the back of the room. Jacob looked at the wall. Then Dana Whitlock stood up. She did not make a speech. She made a list. She entered the hospital record. Nurse Rahman's 4 sentences, dated, with the follow-up box checked. She entered the sworn statement of Dolores Wickham, who described a young woman standing in a driveway at 11 at night with 2 garbage bags and a newborn, and an older woman in a lit doorway with her arms crossed. She entered the preschool notes. A boy saying his mother had to go away. A boy telling a classmate he was not allowed to talk about her. She entered the phone records. 41 call attempts across 19 days. Account settings modified from the account holder's device 2 days after the birth of the child. She entered the custody evaluation. Page 9. She entered the child welfare file from the previous March, with its case number and its dates. And she entered the messages between Nolan Mercer and Brenda Mercer, 17 pages of them, ending with one line that she read aloud in a completely flat voice. Once she realizes she can't get Owen back, she'll stop fighting. She sat down. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a habit of holding a document at arm's length before setting it down. She listened without interrupting. She wrote very little. She read every exhibit herself, slowly, while the courtroom sat in silence and the radiator ticked. Then she took off her glasses and asked Nolan Mercer one question. Why did you prevent the child's mother from seeing him for nearly a month? Nolan shifted in his chair. I didn't prevent anything, Your Honor. She could have come by. She testified that she was told the police would be called. That was my mother. That's not, I never said that. Did you tell her she could see your son? I told her she needed some time. The judge looked down at the papers in front of her. You never obtained an order preventing her from seeing her child. Nolan said nothing. You had concerns significant enough, you say, to remove a 5-year-old from his mother's care for 26 days. You had an attorney within 4 days of being served with divorce papers. She looked up. In that same period, did you file anything at all with this court regarding the child's safety? No, ma'am. Why not? I didn't think I needed to. You didn't think you needed to, the judge repeated, and wrote something down. Jacob did not move. He kept his hands folded and his eyes forward, and he did not permit himself the smallest change of expression, because Ortiz had told him not to, and because he understood that the room did not need his help anymore. Then the judge turned to Lydia. Ms. Calloway, you have documented evidence that you attempted to maintain contact with your son and with your family? Lydia stood. She was wearing the same iron blouse. Yes. Did you voluntarily abandon your son? No. Her voice shook on that one word. She stopped and breathed and started again. I was told I couldn't have him. The courtroom went completely silent. Jacob had spent a lot of hours imagining that moment. He had imagined it as a victory, with some visible sign, a reaction, a sound. There was none. There was just a quiet room, and a woman standing at a table, and a judge writing. But he watched Nolan Mercer's attorney lean over and say something in his client's ear, and he watched Nolan close his eyes. That was the sign. The ruling came 11 days later, in writing as a 23-page order. Lydia was granted primary physical and legal custody of both children. The court found that the mother had not abandoned the child. The court found that the father's account was not supported by the record, and that his stated safety concerns were inconsistent with his own conduct, particularly his failure to seek any protective order during a period in which he claimed the child was at risk. Nolan received limited, structured visitation, supervised at a designated facility, subject to review. Brenda Mercer was prohibited from having unsupervised contact with Owen, while the court reviewed her involvement in the case. The order included 2 paragraphs about her written statement and the ways in which it conflicted with the message records. The judge used the word self-serving once and did not use it lightly. Jacob read the whole thing twice at the kitchen table. He had expected to feel triumphant. He felt something quieter and heavier. He felt the way a man feels when a fever finally breaks and he realizes how much weight he lost while it burned. But the custody order was not the end of it, and that was the part Nolan and Brenda had not planned for. Because a family court decides who a child lives with. It does not decide whether a crime occurred. Along the way, the evidence assembled for the divorce had gone somewhere else. The nurse's note, the neighbor's statement, the child welfare file from March, the messages, the testimony about a night with garbage bags on a front step and the 26 days, and the phone account that had been altered from the account holder's device. A separate investigation had opened, and it was not bound by the custody ruling and did not close when the divorce was finalized. Brenda's own conduct was examined as part of it. She had assumed for months that she was protected by being the grandmother, that nobody prosecutes a woman in a cardigan for helping her son. Neither of them could hide behind the divorce. Jacob's own case moved on its own track, and he did not pretend otherwise. He entered a plea. He did not argue self-defense because there had not been any. He stood in front of a different judge in a different courtroom and answered yes when asked whether he had struck the man first. "Do you have anything to say?" the judge asked him. Jacob had thought about that for weeks. "I'm not going to tell you he provoked me, Your Honor." He did, but that's not a defense, and I'd have said the same thing at the time if I'd been thinking. He kept his hands at his sides. "I've told my daughter for 30 years that a man's job is to keep his head when everybody else loses theirs. I stood in a parking lot and did the opposite. Whatever the court decides, I've already lost the right to say that sentence the way I used to." He received probation and court-ordered counseling. He accepted both without a word of complaint. He went to every session. He did not miss one appointment with his probation officer in 18 months. He knew punching Nolan Mercer had been wrong. He knew nothing could undo it. It had cost him money, months, and the ability to sit next to his daughter during the worst hearings of her life. But he refused to let 6 seconds in a parking lot define the rest of what he was. Months later, the consequences finally arrived. Nolan was convicted of offenses arising from his abuse of Lydia and his unlawful conduct toward her and the children. He was sentenced to prison. Brenda was convicted for her own role in the conduct that had been proven against her. She received a separate jail sentence. Jacob was not in the courtroom for either sentencing. He had made a decision about that early on, and he did not change his mind. He was on probation. He had no business there, and there was something in him that did not want to see it, because he was afraid of what he would feel. Lydia went. She sat in the back row with Dana beside her, and she did not speak to anyone, and afterward she drove home and made dinner and gave the kids a bath. She called her father that night after they were asleep. "How was it?" he asked. Short. A pause. He looked at me once. And nothing. That's what I keep thinking about. I spent 4 years managing that face, watching it to figure out what kind of night we were going to have. Her voice was steady. Today it was just a man in a chair. Jacob stood at his kitchen window with the phone to his ear and looked out at the street. He did not celebrate their imprisonment. He never had a single drink about it or told the story at a bar or let himself say the words, "They got what they deserved." What he felt was relief, and relief is a much smaller thing than victory, because jail was not revenge. Revenge had been available to him in a parking lot in November, and it had cost him a criminal record and a bandaged hand, and had accomplished nothing at all for his daughter. Jail was consequence. It was the machine finally doing what it was supposed to do, months late, after 4 years of a woman being told she was imagining things. "Dad," Lydia said, "are you still there?" "I'm here." "You're quiet." Jacob watched a car go past. "I was thinking about that grocery store," he said. "Don't. I think about it every day." "Dad, you didn't know. That's the part one have to live with." He turned from the window. "But I'm not going to carry it around like an apology for the rest of my life either, because that helps nobody. What I'm going to do is answer the phone." He heard his daughter laugh, softly, on the other end. "Come for pancake Saturday," she said. Lydia rented a small house 4 blocks from her father's, on a street with wide sidewalks and old trees that dropped enough leaves in the fall to bury a driveway. She found a job she actually liked, in the office of a veterinary clinic, answering phones and calming down people whose dogs had eaten something they should not have. She was good at it. She came home tired in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Owen started kindergarten. He rode a bus with a number on the side and had strong opinions about which seat was his. Maisie was walking, badly, with her arms out, like a small drunk sailor, and she fell about every 4th step and thought each fall was hilarious. One Saturday morning in October, Jacob drove over. The air had that cold edge it gets in Iowa in the fall, clean and sharp, and somebody 2 houses down was running a leaf blower. There was a bike lying on its side in the grass. There was a jack-o'-lantern on the porch with a face cut into it by a hand that had clearly needed help. He was halfway up the walk when the front door banged open. "Grandpa!" Owen came off the porch at full speed with no coat on, and Jacob caught him and swung him up, and his back complained about it, and he did not care even slightly. "How's my boy?" "Mom made pancakes. Then I came at the perfect time." "She made too many." Owen said it seriously, like a warning. "She made 100. I'll do what I can." Lydia laughed from somewhere inside the kitchen. Jacob heard it through the open door, and it was a real laugh, the kind that comes from the middle of a person instead of the top. Inside, the house smelled like butter and coffee. The radio was on low. Maisie was in a high chair with syrup in her hair, banging a plastic spoon against the tray with total commitment. Jacob stood in the doorway of the kitchen with his coat still on and looked at all of it. For a moment, he remembered the grocery store. He remembered the buzzing sign with the burned-out letter, the lemon smell of the mop water, his daughter standing in aisle 9 in a coat that could not keep anyone warm, holding a newborn wrapped in a bath towel, counting coins in her palm and coming up short. He remembered that she had believed her own father had walked away from her. He remembered it every time he walked into a store. He expected he always would. "You okay?" he asked. Lydia turned from the stove with a spatula in her hand. "I am now." Jacob nodded. He knew there would always be scars. He knew Lydia flinched, still, when a phone rang late at night. He knew there were days when Owen asked questions that did not have good answers, and that there would be more of those questions when he was 10, and 12 and 17. Neither of them would forget it. Jacob had stopped expecting to. But she was not homeless. She was not isolated. And she was not afraid. Owen came running back into the room with a piece of paper held over his head like a flag. "Grandpa, look." Jacob took it and turned it right side up. It was a crayon drawing. A house with a crooked roof. A yellow sun in the corner with lines coming off it. And in front of the house, for people, all of them roughly the same size, all of them with the same enormous smile. "Who's this?" Jacob asked, pointing at the tallest one. "That's Mom. And this one? That's me. That's Maisie." Owen pointed at a small round figure that was mostly head. Then his finger moved to the fourth. "And that's you?" Jacob looked at the drawing for a second longer than he needed to. Then he looked up at his daughter across the kitchen. Lydia was watching him. She smiled, and she did not say anything because she did not have to. The family that two people had worked very hard to take apart was standing in a kitchen on a Saturday morning, arguing about pancakes. And Jacob Calloway understood the one thing the worst year of his life had taught him. Justice does not look like a man swinging in a parking lot. He had tried that, and all it had ever bought him was a bill. Justice is quieter than that. It is a file cabinet in a county office with dates in it. It is a nurse who wrote 4 sentences at the end of a long shift. It is a neighbor who finally got asked. It is a 5-year-old boy who held on to one true thing in a house full of lies. And in the end, justice is this: standing in a warm kitchen, holding a drawing with 4 people on it, and watching the people who tried to break your family discover that they no longer have any power over it at all.